Doctor Who is required. Bring him here. Hello everybody and welcome to another Doctor Who review. This time I'm doing a review from William Hartnell's era, and it's one of the last stories he ever made, The War Machines. As always, I have the television companion in front of me here, and I'm going to read out the synopsis from the book. The TARDIS arrives in London in 1966, and the Doctor and Dodo visit the Post Office Tower. There they meet Professor Brett, whose revolutionary new computer, Wotan, Will Operating Thought Analog, can actually think for itself and is shortly to be linked up to other major computers around the world, a project overseen by civil servant Sir Charles Summer. It transpires, however, that Wotan considers that humans are inferior to machines and should therefore be ruled by them. Exerting a hypnotic influence, it arranges the construction of war machines, heavily armed, self-contained, mobile computers, with which to take over the world. These prove more than a match for troops, but by establishing a magnetic force field, the Doctor is able to capture one of them, which he then reprograms to destroy Wotan. Dodo, now back in her own time, decides to remain on Earth. The Doctor enters the TARDIS alone, but Brett's secretary Polly and her merchant seaman friend Ben Jackson follow him inside just before it dematerialises. Okay, here we go. One of the last Hartnell stories in Doctor Who. The final story of the third season of Doctor Who, The War Machines, and the first that's a progenitor of many firsts for Doctor Who. I'll go through them one at a time. But overall, yeah, it's an okay story. It's a computer takes over the world. It's the first real proper big machine takes over the world type story you get in Doctor Who. Up till now, it's been very much very futuristic sci-fi stories, and then a lot of history kind of interchange between each other. But this is the start of the series starting to go away from all the historicals as much, and having a few more present day Earth-based stories. There's only a handful, if I recall correctly, up to this point. An Earthly Child is one, of course. The Planet of Giants is another. And I think there is one more where you see modern day Earth, but I think that's the end of The Chase. The rest of them have been time travelling. This is really the first proper present day story since An Earthly Child, really, with proper kind of pseudo-scientific sci-fi elements and kind of an Earth-based setting, Earth-based threat. This is, as I say, the last story of the season, and it is the second last story that Hartnell was originally contracted for. He was only supposed to do one more after this, and that was effectively the Savages, or not the Smugglers, that came out next. But it does change the dynamic and kind of introduce a more swinging 60s feel to an extent as well. We'll go through the characters, we'll have a look at the plot and everything else as well, and obviously do all the usual bits and pieces with it. So, William Hartnell, the First Doctor, definitely in his prime. Definitely the establishment of the character we all know and love is there. Lovable, irascible at times, still anti-establishment. I mean, he does work with Sir Charles Summer in this story, but he isn't, he's working with them, but he's kind of still thinks he's above them and better than them, and that kind of grandfatherly respect there. It's interesting seeing them walking around London and going to different locations in London, different places, placed in Covent Garden you see. There's also bits around about the Post Office Tower as well that you see. A couple of places, I think, in Kensington they went to as well when they filmed. So there's quite a few places in London you see at that time, which is really cool to see. Hartnell puts in a decent performance. You can see it's slightly more restrained. You can see that that it is effectively more a Polly and Ben show at times. But I think that's just the nature of the character at the time. Obviously, Hartnell was very late in his tenure. His illness is starting to become more apparent. I mean, you wouldn't know unless you know the background of what's happening here. It's still a very good performance. There's not many flub lines this time. I think there's only one time he pauses in the middle of the recording for the words he was saying, but it's pretty solid in the recording there. So they've managed to get him with good stuff, and they've managed to get him off pat there. Jackie Lane as Dodo. Now, there's not much Dodo in the archive to see, if I'm honest with you. There is one episode of The Celestial Toymaker that's available to see. We've got her first full story in the Ark, and we also have this. And they've got gunfighters as well, and she's trying to be Vicky, but isn't Vicky, and isn't Susan, and is actually a little bit grating at times. Supposed to be this cool chick with a kind of posh RP accent. She doesn't quite pull it off. Not the strongest performance. I mean, she's alright when she's hypnotised, but not the best performance really. The stars really are Michael Craze and Annika Wills, who are in their first story here. Michael Craze is very good as Ben. I think they are bringing in Ben for more the action side because obviously they had that substitute for Stephen before. And he has a good bit in here about investigating the factory and that where the war machines are being made and everything. And it's really cool seeing the character being established there. Polly is a little bit more femme fatale. Well, not femme fatale, but more Perils of Pauline in this one. Or Perils of Polly, as it might be, I suppose. A little bit screamy, but you can see there's intelligent there. You can see there's a cool girl. Pretty lady anyway, Annika Wells always was in the stories that she was in. But I love the bits when she's hypnotised with Wotan. I do like those bits because she's basically, there's a kind of sinisterness there that she has, and she's quite forceful the way she speaks to Ben at certain times, but there is that doubt there about a friend and everything else, and she's a very forthright and confident person, and you can see that in the story. And I haven't seen much of Polly really outside this. There's very little Polly outside this, if I'm honest with you. You've got the 10th Planet, you've got the Underwater Menace, you've got a couple of episodes of the Faceless Ones, but there's not really much Polly you can see here, so you don't really see much of the character really in this. So it's interesting to see, but it's not, it's a progenitor. I don't know whether she does degrade the character as they go along. I don't think she does. I think she is pretty good in that respect. Guest cast. Pretty simple guest cast. You've got John Harvey, who plays Professor Brett. Very simple professor with his white coat and bow tie on to show him he's a professor. Creator of Wotan, inventor of Wotan. Gets hypnotised very early on and becomes the main protagonist. And there's a lot of exposition. I'll come into that in a minute with conversation. There's a lot of exposition in this. I'll go for the production in a minute. He does a decent job. Alan Curtis is as good as Major Green. Again, it's more exposition. It's more there's a lot of talking going on, and that's the nature of the time, and I'll come into that in a second. William Mervyn does a good job as Sir Charles Summer. I love that kind of fact of, I'm a civil servant, I'm a Whitehall kind of guy, and yeah, come on, don't give me that poppycock. I know what you're saying, Doctor, but I don't think it's true. That sort of idea, I do like that aspect to it. And then you've got John Carter, who plays Kempton. Again, another role that's really just there for exposition, really. One of Brett's... Professor Kempton is one of Brett's colleagues in the Wotan process, the post office tower. This story is a progenitor for UNIT a couple of years down the line, and the army versus unworldly forces. This is the first instance of a story set on Earth with Earth technology trying to take over the world that we've seen in the modern context. Computers are fairly new then. Wotan's looked quite a bulky machine. It's an idea and a concept from Kit Pedler. Ian Stewart Black is the writer. It's the second story in a row he's written because he wrote The Savages before, which wrote out Stephen. But the story overall is a nice run around. The direction is okay, although it's not got the Douglas Camfield style that you see in The Invasion, which is the first proper UNIT story. I think he also did Web of Fear as well, the Yeti story on the Underground. But it's not got the kind of army Dougie Campfield style that you see in the later stories, but it's a decent effort. You get a few shots of the army when they're trying to defend against the war machine for the Covent Garden warehouse in episode 4, where you see elements that you would enjoy or like of it. It plods along okay, but there's a lot of exposition, and that might be partly exposition because some of the stuff in the war machines is, some of the parts of what they've got, some of the elements are missing, so there's a lot more static shots and cutaways in here for exposition, but there's a lot of explaining about what Wotan's going to do, when it's going to do it, why it's doing it, what its motive is, why it says, the Doctor's important. And of course in this one, Doctor Who is Wotan's thinking of his name. Obviously we know that's wrong, so the Wotan was wrong, it was fallible. He knew what TARDIS was, but didn't know the Doctor's proper name. Wasn't that intelligent. But overall, it's it's quite a plodding story, but it does see lay the foundations of the Doctor working with establishment more in the second and third Doctor's eras. The army kind of involved a bit more, although it's obviously just a core of the army that's been given here. That's not really specific which regiment it really is in that respect. Not that I can recall anyway. This is Michael Ferguson's first directorial story. He did go on to direct The Sea to Death, which is a really cool story. The Claws of Axos and The Ambassadors of Death in Pertwee's era. So he has form, but this is his first proper directorial debut for Doctor Who, and it's not a bad wee effort. It's a nice little effort here. There's a little bit of action in there. I love the fact the Doctor's problem solving. It's very much Doctorish at this point. The grumpy grandfather is there, only very small elements. It's more a caring, rounded character, and I do like the characterization here of Hartnell. I do like the way it works. The music, well, there isn't any music really, and this is the first, and I'll come back to the music in a second because there isn't really music in that respect, but there is sound effects and background ambient noise, which I'll come back to in a second. But the story itself, it's the second one that has a title for the whole serial. Up till The Savages, every episode had its own title. So they are still experimenting just a little bit about how they do the titles and the captions of the story. And this one has a kind of computer printout sort of idea for the episode's number and the name of the story on here. And the only other one I can see of element that's referenced like that is a couple of stories later with the 10th Planet with a kind of computerized type thing as well, but obviously that's Cybermen, so it's going to have that feel to it. And then it goes back to the standard kind of captions at the beginning of the story from there. But this is an experiment in it. There's also the fact, obviously, the music, I'm saying here, there isn't any. You've got titles, and you've got the title music and the credits, and you have a kind of timpani, rolling timpani to a cymbal crash when the titles come up for the episode, and that's it. The rest of it is background noise. So you've got the noise of the war machine and the radiophonic noise of that, and the machine itself is not a bad wee design, bit clunky, bit 60s. It kills people with fire extinguishers, which is something that obviously they thought by 66 was acceptable, but they couldn't do with Daleks, because obviously the colour movies with Peter Cushing had fire extinguishers for the Daleks doing stuff. It's a cheap way of doing it, but obviously the Daleks have that ray gun, that kind of effect that you have, which has always been improved. But then you've got the situation with the war machines rolling around London. It's quite effective. They don't go upstairs. I don't know how they managed to get up to the top of the post office tower at the end, but they do. I think maybe they use a lift, although I don't think the lift's big enough for the post office tower, but that's a minor point. Because what does at the top of the post office tower, this war machine trundles at the end and destroys Wotan, the Doctor reprograms. But the music's atmospheric. It's basically noise of machinery, the war machine, Wotan. You've got the hypnotized music as well. But apart from that, there isn't any music in here. It's just exposition talk that puts it along. And you do need to be in a kind of right mood to watch this at times, because it is quite talky. And if you're not in a mood to listen to talky, you want more action, you want something to keep you awake, it's not the story you watch straight away. I do enjoy the story. I have the story in VHS. I've got the story obviously elsewhere as well. It was one of the earliest stories I've got, so I do have a fondness for it. But it isn't one of my favourites. It's a good romp. It's good to sit down and take your brain out and watch, but it's not one of these ones like Androzani or the Happiness Patrol or Visitation that we'll go back to as a choice. I will go back to those stories. I don't tend to go back to this one as often. But overall, I do enjoy the story. I do like it, but it's not the best. It's not the one I would say is one of my top stories. I would say this story is a 3.5 TARDISes out of 5 story. So it's solid enough, but it's not quite what I look for in a Doctor Who story for me. But I still watch it, I still enjoy it, but it's not one I come off the shelf, as I say, straight away. So let's have a look and see how the War Machine sits within all the stories reviewed so far. The War Machines is the 4th 3.5 TARDISes out of 5 I've reviewed. It sits alongside the Aztecs, the Leisure Hive, and Vengeance and Varos, and so the nature of these things is near the bottom of the list. But at the top still is the top 4.5 TARDISes out of 5s of the Happiness Patrol, Inferno, The Day of the Doctor, and the Caves of Androzani. So that's where the War Machine sits. Where does it sit for you? What do you like about the War Machines? Hit the comments down below and let me know. Also, don't forget to like and share this video. If you do share it, please do put the hashtag teamstructor down there. And also, don't forget to hit that like button as well. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell if you like what you see. I post a video every Sunday at 4 PM GMT, and don't forget to check out all the other reviews I've done. I've done the Unearth the Child and the Aztecs up in the top left-hand corner there. But until next time, thank you very much, guys, for watching. Next week is a Kidstructor, so I hope to see you then. But until then, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you later.